Hi, I'm Jimmy Whitelaw, and this is Chip Hardy with the Nashville Demo Studio. Today we're going to talk about Music Row 101, how to get your songs cut, how to pitch your songs, everything that you want to know as a writer on how to become successful on the row. So I asked Chip to come here to answer a lot of these questions because Chip has years of experience on the row as at labels, heading up publishing companies, as plugging. Also, Chip was a writer as well, so he definitely knows the ins and outs. And so let's get started.
Let's get started.
All right. First of all, I wanted to talk about the different avenues of getting your song cut on Music Row. And I think the main three avenues would be do it yourself, publishing deals, or working with a song plugger.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to start with probably what most of us start with, and that's doing it yourself. So the first thing when I came to town as a writer was, I came here thinking, oh, I'm just going to be able to walk up and down Music Row and knock on doors and drop off my CD, and people are going to be really excited to listen to it. But what I found really quick was that was not the case. When I moved to Nashville was the first time I ever heard the words unsolicited material.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about
Sure.
that?
Sure. If you're going to do it yourself, first of all, you really need to be here. And you need to do the footwork and the networking necessary to know people so that they know who you are, and that they will believe that you're going to be bringing them something that will not waste their time.
Right.
As far as just coming into town for a couple of days, you're right. You're not going to be able to go knock on the door at Sony Tree or at Universal or at EMI or any of the major companies and expect to get your songs even taken, much less heard.
And why is that? Why is it considered unsolicited material? And why won't labels and publishers listen to stuff if you're coming in for your first time and you want someone to listen to your songs? Why is that?
Well, to be real honest with you, it's because everybody has found out that you have to listen to 999 things out of 1,000 to find one that's remotely competitive.
Okay.
And they just plus the publishing companies have staff writers, which I think we're going to talk about in a little bit, and that's where the majority of their focus and their energy goes, is to get their staff writer songs recorded.
Right.
Much more than an outside thing. But to answer your question, it's mainly because they have to go through so much stuff that's just not very good.
Right.
And it's just a lot easier to say we don't accept unsolicited material than it is to try and weed through 300 or 400 of these things or more.
And they just don't have the staffing to
They
do
don't
that either.
They don't have the staff and they don't have the time, because a big part of the publisher's job now, it's not only plugging songs, but it's also networking their writers with other writers, with artists, with managers, doing that legwork to get the writers in the positions to get cuts,
Right.
to get songs recorded. And there's just not enough hours in the day
To listen
for
to all the
them to sit
unsolicited
and
material.
listen to unsolicited material.
And would you say that maybe some of the other reasons that they might be gun shy to listen to outside songs from people that they don't know would be for legal reasons?
There's definitely that too, because there's not a major publishing company in town that hasn't at one time been sued by an unsigned writer because something was dropped off or something was accepted, and 6 months or a year later, a song comes out on the radio that has a title similar or has a storyline that's similar, or even perhaps a similar melody. And you know, none of this stuff, the vast majority of it, it can't be proven that writer dropping off a CD
Right.
had anything to do with that song that's on the radio being
Right.
written by one of their writers. And what it does, it involves legal action on their part, and it just ties up. It costs money.
Mm-hmm.
It costs time, and it's just not worth it to them to listen to that stuff and
Right.
possibly wind up being sued.
So a few bad apples spoiled the barrel.
Few
pretty
bad
much.
apples spoil the barrel, and that's pretty much the way it is in a lot of different aspects.
And I just wanted to touch on that, the whole, someone stole my song. You know, I'm sure you've heard it a million times from unsigned writers or new writers, you know. I've heard it a lot. Oh, so-and-so song stole my song. And then I go, well, what was your song? And it's the same title, you know.
Right.
And
Right.
I tell writers, I'm like, look me up on ASCAP and you'll find, I think I've stolen from myself a couple times titles. I mean, there's only so many really good titles and clever things. And, every time I do a title search on a new song that I've written, invariably I'll come up with some other, and it's usually other writers I know have songs under the same title, not the same song, but it's just coincidence a lot of times.
There's something, whether you choose to believe it or not, there's some sort of a creative collective consciousness.
Mhm.
And if you're sitting in Omaha writing a song that you feel like is a very unique, brand new idea, the chances are really good that in one of these writers' rooms in Music Row, somebody is probably writing a similar storyline or a similar idea,
Right.
maybe even with that same title that you thought was so unique.
Right.
So it's it's really not uncommon. And like you say, as a writer, I've stolen from myself
Yeah, definitely.
many times.
Yeah. And also, just to wrap that up as well, Cliff Aldridge once told me, the second, when he was Windswept, or maybe it's the third, I'm confused. He told me, he goes, man, if unsigned writers knew how much work would go into stealing a song, they would know that we have we don't want to do it. It's too much work to do it. It's easier just to let my writers do what they do and let them bring... I mean, just the steps that would have to be taken to steal an unsigned writer's song.
That's exactly right.
Are really involved.
That's
it's just
exactly
not even
right.
He's like, nobody has time to do that. So
That's exactly right. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that that's never happened.
right.
But and I remember early on as a writer myself, where I sent some things to a band, to an artist, and they came out with several things later on that I felt like had been partially lifted.
Mm-hmm.
But, that's here again. To prove that, number one, would have been impossible. That they ever even received the songs
Right.
and or had access to them. And number two, like I say, whenever a writer is working on an idea that they feel like is very unique and I haven't heard this before, the chances are really good that somebody in one of those little rooms somewhere else down on Music Row is writing something very similar.
Right.
There really and truly is nothing new under the sun.
Right.
You can take it and you can twist it, but somebody else is doing that too, and there's probably something extremely similar going on.
Right. Well, let's talk about how do you go from being unsolicited to solicited.
Okay.
I wrote an article a couple months ago that I had you go over with me on some of the stuff that I've done, and I'm pretty unconventional, as you know, but I think you kind of have to be if you don't know anybody, especially if you don't live here.
Yes.
And for the writers that don't live here, I think you would agree, it's important that if you don't live in Nashville, that you try to make at least, I say start off your first 2 years making one trip a year.
Mm-hmm.
If, whatever you can budget. And then, that first trip, you might meet somebody that'll let you stay with them and cut some,
Some of your expense.
some of your expense off, and then
mhm.
maybe that third year you come twice a year.
Right.
Until you're working up until maybe you're coming once a quarter or you're coming every other month.
Exactly. Exactly.
Just because there's a synergy here that I think you'll agree, it's just not emulated when you're out there in Kansas somewhere
No.
riding
no.
on your own.
No, it definitely
Not
is
to say
not.
that people outside of Nashville have not gotten song cuts. Aaron Hickenlooper had
Right.
had a big number one, never lived here.
Right.
But there's also other writers like who's the guy that wrote the song Remembers When?
Huh.
Is it Hugh? I can't
It's
remember the
not-
writer's
it's not
name.
Tom McHugh.
No. I can't remember the writer's name,
I
guys,
don't remember
but
either.
he doesn't live here.
Right.
He's on a staff writing deal. He comes once every 6 months. He
Mhm.
doesn't co-write. He
Mhm.
comes in here, turns his
Oh,
songs
I
in.
know who it is. I just can't think.
But
of
he
his
doesn't
name.
live here.
Yeah.
But so I'm not saying that you absolutely must be here. But typically, if you're going to fish, you do it in the lake and not in the sand.
Well, but you also have to remember, even though he's not here, he has representation here.
Right. And he comes here.
And
you know?
and he comes here and sits with his plugger or with his publisher, and they discuss the new songs that he's written, that he's brought in, where they're going to go, who they would be good for, and so it's not like he's just out there blindly
Right.
sending them in, and
Right.
somebody's saying, "I'll pitch this one, I won't pitch this one."
Right.
And, you know, he's got the networking down. He was here.
Right.
He was here for like 10 or 12 years
Right.
until he
Made
started.
it and then moved.
Right. He started having a lot of success and just
Yeah.
decided, I don't want to be there in all of that anymore.
Right.
But he still has his finger in the pie, and he still knows what's going on here.
So, outside of making trips here, I would say to go from unsolicited to solicited, it's about relationships. That's just the way Nashville is. It's not going to change.
No.
You're not going to change it. So if you want to be successful here,
No.
you know, that's just the way it has to be. But I think there's some innovative ways you can go about doing the same thing everyone else has done. And that's through relationships. For me, what I started with is when I got here, I joined NSAI,
Mm-hmm.
the Nashville Songwriters Association. I was also already familiar with Taxi because I used to work there.
Right.
Unfortunately, I can't use Taxi services because it's a conflict of interest because I used to work there. But if I could, I totally would because you work with Taxi. They're
Yes.
excellent company.
Excellent. Yes.
So those would be my first two things that I would do. One of the other things that I did was I went to as many events in town as I could. And it was really surprising to me how many events there were. Number one, parties that the public's, the performing rights organizations have parties, the publishers have their number one parties, and anyone can go to them.
Right.
And so I found that a good way to meet people. But I wanted...
Well, one of the other things too, Jimmy, is is go to the writers' nights.
Right.
You know, that you can definitely find out where those are, when they are, and sometimes who's going to be on there. But I always go back. When I first got to town, there was a group of probably 10 or 12 of us that got to town at the same time. Through the years, there have been people who left, and it's probably down now to 3 or 4 of us. But we hung out together when we first got to town. We watched each other have success. We, were there for each other. We networked through each other. You know, when one of us got a publishing deal, the other ones would have somewhat of an open door to go
Right.
see this publisher and play our music. And that's extremely important because going to the writers' nights, you're going to meet people. And they're going to remember you the next time that you come to town. And here again, what Jimmy said a while ago is extremely important. The more often that you can do that, and that you can be seen, that you can meet people, that you can talk to people, the better off you're going to be.